This interview is part of the History Heard project. The content of this interview may be used for historical research. However, no part of the video itself may be reproduced without the express written permission of an authorized representative of History Heard. Today is January 4th, 2010 at 4:30 p.m. This is an interview with Ellen Hawes in Sarasota, Florida. She was born on September 7th, 1919 in Brooklyn, New York. You know, coming from the village, was there like a connection between Random House and the village? And did you feel like there was a personal connection for you?
Well,
because of the writers and
yeah. Well, one of the writers was one of the people that we had. I don't know what we had published at first, but we was a fashion designer of the day named Elizabeth Hawes, who lived on Jane Street where I lived. I lived at number 1 Jane, and I can't remember where she lived. But a lot of her mail came to me, and some of my mail went to her. And I remember exchanging mail with her. She was a famous fashion designer of the day, and also she had written a book called Fashion is Spinach. Her idea was that fashion changes its style. He was a philosopher, an English philosopher. That fashion is, changeable, but style is something innate, that you have your style rather than you keep following the trends, and that there's an innate style in good fashion. And Alfred North Whitehead, I think that's his name. He was a very good and famous English philosopher of his day. And I can't remember the question again.
Your relationship. You were talking about.
Oh, my relationship was, I brought it all with me, because I knew people who were at Knopf, wherever, and I was a member of the guild I was shop chairman for the guild, the magazine and book guild, and everybody lived either near the village or in the village, or we met with each other and they lived on the west side or the east side or whatever. But the village was kind of a meeting place for a lot of people. They came. It filled up on weekends, the places, the venues, the arts, a lot of it took place there. Yeah.
Now, the 30s and 40s were also a very important time for American literature, coming out. Did you know at the time that it was picking up?
Again, it was my world. It was all I knew. I didn't know that Faulkner was going to be the writer. I didn't know Sinclair Lewis, who came in, and I saw him quite frequently, was going to be venerated. I mean, he was a writer, and I read his works and I appreciated them. I mean, you never thought of them as figures. I mean, you don't when you're going through the experience. They're good writers, and you enjoy meeting them because what you've read has excited you or interested you, but not because you thought that they were going to be pillars, let's say, of literature. They were people that you knew, or that you admired, or that you liked, or that you didn't like that much. Some of them, I must confess. There were some that, I didn't. But they were writers. And when you're young, it's I mean, I don't know if society has changed. It's very hard to look ahead and see who might, hold the brass ring. It's only afterward that you begin to say, wow, I went through that. I talked to that person. I had a chance. I learned. Maybe I can't even remember what I learned, but I did. There's something that you gather on the way. Now, I knew in a sense, how important Woody Guthrie was, because he came from a world that I had no relationship to at all. I mean, he'd been on freight trains. That was the exciting thing to me, that he could ride the freights, do all of that. That was the discovery, if you like. Wow, wasn't he an unusual, iconic kind of figure for me right from the very beginning. I had no trouble with the really far out figures because they had done things I couldn't imagine doing. That was where the real excitement came. I can tell you that. Pete Seeger less, because he wasn't that, in a sense. Woody was a character, and Hughie Ledbetter was a character. I mean, somebody who'd been in prison, things like that. It was the far out people and it was very interesting to me, because a lot of Josh White, who was black, sang with the group, and he had come from a very different sort of black experience. I didn't learn afterward that he had gone through the same thing, that he had seen people as a child hung up and lynched, and I had no idea at all. But he had sort of formed into, he wasn't in any way unusual. He was just part of the group who just happened to be a different color. So he was very different. But Woody and Hughie and people like that, they were whole wonderful discoveries to me, people that I couldn't imagine. So I was particularly interested in that. I was particularly interested in, I remember, I loved meeting Karen Blixen because I knew she had lived in Africa, and I knew that she had, I don't know where she came from at the time, I don't know where she was living then, but it was very exciting to me. So.
Did you ever get to read, Gertrude Stein or William Faulkner before it was published? Like editing or something?
No.
No?
No, never did. No, I've never edited anything, as I look back on it, that I remember. I can't even remember what I edited, to tell you the truth.
But was it a big deal when The Sound and the Fury came through? Your peers were, oh, you should read this, or look what Faulkner just brought in, or anything like that?
No, because those, a lot of those books were so edited. You cannot imagine.
Really?
Editors were very important. Look Homeward Angel, the Thomas Wolfe book.
Mm.
That was just pieces of writing put together by editors. I mean, he had, he wrote whatever, and a lot of publishing still, I'm sorry to say, is that way.
That's unbelievable.
I know.
But the author gets all the credit.
I know. But the editors, the top editors, were very important in their field, because they could take all these writings, all these notes that people wrote, and put them all together. I'm not saying all writers were that way,
Mm-hmm.
but there were a number of writers who needed very heavy editing, and still today do. And so when it was all together, yes, it was very exciting. I mean, I can remember Sinclair Lewis's. I mean, I think maybe Sinclair Lewis was an exception, because he was very traditional in the sense that he was a writer and that was it. But I knew of a number of cases where the editor-in-chief was responsible for the book really coming out in the form that it did, because they worked so closely with the writers, who were tremendously talented, but who didn't exactly develop a section quite the way they thought they should, and it was sent back for editing and stuff like that. They worked together a lot. Editors are very important in publishing. I mean, top editors.
Yes.
I was just reading manuscripts. That was all I was doing. I was just a reader and passing it along, and maybe making, changing punctuation, doing things like that. That was all. I wasn't reading for content. So I never became that kind of an editor. I didn't have responsibility for the material, for the thought behind the material, just the grammar,
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
Thank you so much.